My parents told my 10-year-old daughter there was no room for her at the Christmas table. She stood on their porch holding a bag of gifts she'd wrapped herself, and they closed the door. She walked almost 2 miles home in 28-degree darkness to an empty house. When I found out, I didn't scream. I made one phone call. 5 hours later, my parents received a certified letter, and the color left their faces. My name is Miranda Sinclair. I'm 34 and my daughter Sophie is 10. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end. I promise you it gets more intense. And let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. Because what happened in the next few minutes will change everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and what it really means to protect the people you love. Now let me take you back to the week before Christmas. The week everything in my family quietly, permanently cracked open. That December, Sophie and I were living in a one-bedroom apartment off Broad Street in Richmond. She got the bedroom. I got the couch. The radiator made this ticking sound every 40 minutes, like a metronome nobody asked for. And the kitchen faucet had a drip I'd learned to sleep through. You know that sound? That constant, quiet reminder that nothing in your life is quite fixed? It wasn't much, but it was ours. Temporarily, at least. I was mid-divorce. My ex, Daniel, had filed for primary custody 3 months earlier. My attorney had made one thing very clear, and I can still hear her voice when I think about it. The judge will be looking at stability. Stable housing, stable income, stable environment. Any disruption, any hint that Sophie's home life was chaotic, and Daniel's lawyer would use it. They would weaponize it. So I kept my head down. I worked night shifts in the ER at St. Mary's, picked up extra rotations when they came available, and made sure every single bill was paid on the first of the month. I didn't have room for mistakes. I couldn't afford them. My parents knew all of this. They knew about the custody hearing scheduled for January 3rd. And they used it the way you'd use a leash on a dog that's trying to leave. But I'll get to that. That week before Christmas, Sophie was at the kitchen table every single night after homework, cutting colored paper, folding cards, writing names in her round, careful handwriting. She made one for my mother, one for my father, one for my brother Marcus, one for his wife Elena, and 2 for their kids. She wrapped small gifts in newspaper because wrapping paper was $4 a roll, and I'd said maybe next time. She didn't complain. She just found the comic section and used that instead. Do you know how much that broke me? My child finding solutions. My child accepting less. My child becoming small. On one of the cards, the one for my mother, she'd written, "Dear Grandma, I can't wait to see everyone. Love, Sophie." And beside her name, a little hand-drawn sun. She always drew that. She said it was so people would feel warm when they read it. There was a framed photograph in my parents' living room. It had been there as long as I could remember. My great-grandmother Eleanor standing in front of that house the day she bought it in 1987. On the back, in her handwriting, "For my family, all of them." I remember being maybe 12, visiting Grandma Eleanor at that house, and her putting her hand on my shoulder and saying, "This house is mine, Miranda. Remember that." I didn't understand why she said it that way. Like she was planting a flag. Like she knew something about the future that I didn't. I would understand later. My mother, Catherine Marshall before she married my father, was 60 years old and had never met a room she couldn't control. At church, she was the woman who organized the potluck, remembered everyone's birthday, brought casserole to every funeral. Neighbors called her a saint. She collected that word the way some people collect porcelain, carefully and where everyone could see it. At home, Catherine decided who was invited to dinner and who wasn't, who sat where, who spoke and when. There was this precision to her control that felt almost artistic, almost evil. My father, Robert, 62, had retired early from warehouse management. He sat in his recliner and agreed with whatever she said. His silence wasn't neutral. It was a vote. It was a choice. And it was a betrayal. My brother Marcus was 29 and had never paid rent in his life. He sold cars at a dealership in Short Pump, made average money, and spent like he made twice that because our parents covered the difference. He and his wife Elena lived upstairs in the house, Grandma Eleanor's house, for free. Marcus drove a truck our mother had bought him, with money she called savings. Nobody asked where the savings came from. Me? I paid for nursing school with loans and night shifts at a diner. When I got married, my mother said, "Keep it simple, Miranda. An outdoor ceremony is fine." When Marcus got married, she booked a $15,000 venue. When I filed for divorce, she said, "A woman should know how to keep her husband." When Marcus and Elena nearly split 2 years ago, she said, "Elena needs to be more patient with him." Every single week she'd call me, not to ask how I was, to remind me not to do anything stupid before the custody hearing. The implication wasn't subtle. If you make waves, you won't have a place to land, and the judge will hear about it. I once saw her close her laptop fast when I walked into the kitchen. The screen had an Airbnb logo on it. I didn't think much of it then. That was a mistake. Christmas Eve, the preparation. The plan for Christmas was simple. I was scheduled for a double shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., because holiday pay was time and a half and I needed every cent for the attorney's retainer. My parents would pick up Sophie at 4, bring her to the house for Christmas dinner, and I'd get her the next morning. A standard arrangement. A normal plan. "Of course, we'll have a wonderful time," my mother said on the phone when I confirmed. Her voice had that warmth that only came out when she wanted something from you. My father's voice from the background, "Yep, just bring her over." Sophie spent Christmas Eve laying out her outfit. A green sweater she'd picked at Goodwill. The one she said made her look Christmassy. She arranged the gifts in a canvas tote bag, each one tagged, each tag with the sun. I packed her things that afternoon like I was packing a deployment bag. Heavy coat, wool hat, gloves, scarf. I slipped a granola bar into her pocket in case dinner ran late. And I put something else in there. An old phone of mine. No data plan, no apps, just the ability to make calls. I'd programmed 2 numbers into it. Mine and Maggie's. Maggie Cole was my best friend. A nurse on the same floor at St. Mary's. She'd known Sophie since birth. If anything happened and I was elbows deep in a trauma case with no signal, Sophie could reach Maggie. "Just in case," I told Sophie. "If you can't get me, call Auntie Maggie." Sophie tucked the phone into her coat pocket and smiled at me in that way that made me feel like I was doing something right, when really I was just trying not to do something wrong. "Mom, relax," she said. "It's just Grandma and Grandpa's house." If only she'd been right about that. Have you ever had that moment where you just knew something was about to go wrong? Where your gut was screaming but everyone around you was telling you that you were being paranoid? That was me, standing in that parking lot, watching my daughter drive away in my mother's car. But I pushed it down. I had to. I had a job to do. I had a reputation to maintain. I had a custody hearing coming up that I couldn't afford to lose. I was about to learn that some costs are much higher than money. At 10:32 p.m., during my 15-minute break, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Maggie. 1 voicemail from Sophie. 0 calls, 0 texts from my mother. 0 from my father. 0 from Marcus. I listened to the voicemail first. 23 seconds. "Mom, Grandma said there's no room." I walked home. "I'm okay. I'm in the apartment." "Merry Christmas, Mom." That voice. That steady, small, precise voice. Not crying. Worse than crying because it meant she'd already decided this was something she was supposed to handle on her own. She was 10 years old, and she'd already learned that her family wasn't safe. That she wasn't worth a seat at the table. I stood in the staff break room with my back against a cold steel locker, and I listened to my daughter wish me Merry Christmas from an apartment she should never have been in that night. Played it again. Then one more time. Because some part of me was waiting for it to stop being real. Then I called Maggie. "She's fine," Maggie said immediately. "She's asleep. She's at my place." And then very quietly, "Audrey, she walked home alone in the dark on Christmas." Maggie had already sent me the photo by text. I opened it. My daughter still in her coat, sitting on the bed, 1 lamp on. That bag of gifts on the floor. Timestamp. 6:02 p.m. December 25th. I looked at that image for a long time. I looked at the way the light hit only half her face. The way the rest of the apartment behind her was just nothing. Dark furniture. No tree. No music. No people. "Thank you, Maggie," I said. "I'll finish my shift." She paused. "Audrey." "I'll finish my shift," I said again. And I did. I went back to the floor. I charted meds and changed dressings and spoke to patients in that calm, even voice they train you to use when everything is falling apart, and you are the one person in the room who cannot afford to show it. But inside something was breaking. Something that had been held together by fear and obligation, and the desperate hope that my family might surprise me, that they might choose my daughter. They had made their choice. Now it was my turn. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., I sat in my car in the hospital garage for maybe 4 minutes. Engine running, heat on, phone in my hand. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped at one name, Miranda Sinclair. My grandmother's name. I didn't call yet. Not at 6 a.m. in the morning. But I would. And when I did, things would begin moving in a direction my parents had never once imagined. Because they had spent 18 years in a house they thought was theirs, and they had never bothered to read the paperwork that said otherwise. What would you do in this situation? Would you forgive them? Or would you stand your ground? Tell me in the comments below. And if this resonates with you, hit that subscribe button. Because part 2 is where everything gets real. This is where the paperwork becomes a weapon, where the law becomes justice, and where an 89-year-old woman decides that enough is enough. Sophie stood on my parents' porch holding a bag of gifts wrapped in newspaper. They told her there was no room. She walked home alone in the dark. I found out during my shift, and I made a decision that would change everything. This is part 2. My mother called me at 8:14 the next morning, December 26. I know the exact time because I was recording. Virginia is a one-party consent state. That means as long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, it's legal. I knew. I pressed record before I pressed answer. I'd learned that much from working intake in the ER. When things are about to go sideways, you document first and feel later. Audrey, her voice was light, almost cheerful. I heard Sophia went home last night. I'm not sure what happened. I told her to wait 10 minutes while I rearranged things and she just left. You know how kids are. So dramatic. I let the silence sit for 3 full seconds. Then Mom. Sophie called me at 5:52. She said you told her there was no room. She walked home. I heard it then. That small shift. A recalibration. The gears turning behind that polished voice. Well, it was chaotic, Audrey. Marcus's mother-in-law showed up last minute. I had to make a decision. What was I supposed to do? Kick out an elderly guest for a child? You kicked out a 10-year-old? Silence. For seconds this time. Then Catherine shifted into her third gear. Offense. Don't start with me, Audrey. I have been supporting you through your mess. Housing you, watching your child, covering for you, and this is the thanks I get. You're just like your father's side. Ungrateful. Every one of you. Her voice was climbing now. Not loud but sharp. The way a blade doesn't need to be big to cut you open. And let me tell you something. If you make this into a thing, don't expect us to show up at your custody hearing. Don't expect a roof. Don't expect anything. 7 minutes and 23 seconds. I recorded all of it, including the last thing she said before she hung up. The thing she probably thought was a threat, but that I filed away as evidence. You do anything stupid, Audrey, and I will make sure that Judge knows exactly what kind of mother you are. I set the phone on the kitchen counter. I looked at the recording file, and I saved it to a folder I just created. I named the folder Receipts. Marcus started texting at 8:45. Not a phone call that would require hearing my voice. Marcus had never been comfortable with anything that couldn't be done from a safe distance. 8:45 a.m. Mom told me you made a big deal about last night. Seriously. 8:47 a.m. Sophie is fine. Kids walk home all the time. Stop being dramatic. 8:52 a.m. You need to apologize to Mom. She's crying. 9:01 a.m. If you push this, I swear I'll tell your ex's lawyer you're unstable. I didn't respond to any of them. I screenshotted every single one. Each one went into the folder. By mid-morning, the machine was running. Catherine had already called her sister, my Aunt Diane, and delivered her version. Audrey abandoned Sophie at our house, then blamed us for it. Aunt Diane called me at 10:15, voice soft with concern that wasn't really for me. Sweetie, your mom is just devastated. Can't you let this go? It's Christmas. Did she tell you that Sophie walked home alone in the dark? A pause. She said Sophie left on her own. Sophie is 10, Aunt Diane. Another pause. Longer. She didn't have an answer for that. I'll pray for the family, she said finally and hung up. I was putting my phone down when it buzzed one more time. Marcus again. But this message was different. The kind of mistake that only happens when someone is texting two conversations at once. 9:22 a.m. from Marcus, meant for Catherine. Don't worry, Mom. She won't do anything. She needs us for the custody thing. She's trapped. I read it twice. Then I screenshotted it and opened the receipts folder. He was right about one thing. I did need them for 9 more days. The custody hearing was January 3rd. After that, the leash came off. But Marcus didn't know about the leash. He only knew about the trap. And people who think you're trapped stop watching what they say. I should give you some history because what happened at Christmas didn't come out of nowhere. It was the loudest note in a song that had been playing my entire life. In the Marshall family, and then in the Sinclair family, there were 2 kinds of children. The investment and the expense. Marcus was the investment. I was the expense. Marcus dropped out of community college after 3 semesters. My parents paid every single dime of his tuition without question. They never asked him to work. They never told him to buckle down. They just paid. I put myself through nursing school on federal loans and a waitressing job that left my feet swollen by midnight. My back ached. My hands were always raw. But I did it. I graduated. My mother's response? Well, at least you finished something. When Marcus got a job selling cars, she threw him a dinner party. When I got married, Catherine told me to keep it simple. An outdoor ceremony is fine, Miranda. No need to go overboard. Budget whatever I could scrape together. When Marcus married Elena 2 years later, my mother booked a venue with a chandelier and a 3-tier cake and wrote a check for $15,000. She called it an investment in his future. When my marriage fell apart, she said, a woman should know how to keep her husband. When Marcus and Elena nearly separated during that bad stretch with the credit card debt, she said, Elena needs to learn patience. And then there was how they treated Sophie. Marcus's 2 kids, David and Harper, were my babies. Catherine posted them on Facebook every week. Matching outfits at Easter. Pumpkin patch in October. My mother's grandchildren front and center. Sophie was Audrey's kid. Or sometimes just the girl. Last Christmas, the year before this disaster, Sophie had been placed at a folding card table in the hallway while everyone else sat at the main table. When she asked why, my mother said, the big table is for immediate family, Sophie. Sophie looked at her. Am I not immediate family? My mother changed the subject. I swallowed it. I was 2 months into the divorce filing, sleeping on a couch, and terrified that one wrong move would cost me my daughter in family court. So I swallowed it the way I've been swallowing things from that family for 30 years. But someone else heard about that moment. Someone who had been waiting. Someone who would not swallow it. Grandma Eleanor. Let me tell you about the house. It was a 3-story colonial on a tree-lined street in the near suburbs of Richmond. White siding, black shutters, wraparound porch. The kind of house that belongs in a photograph. The kind of house that becomes a story. My great-grandmother Eleanor bought it in 1987 with cash from 40 years of bookkeeping and a pension from the Henrico County school system. She raised her son, my grandfather, there. When he passed in 2003, she stayed another 2 years. Then in 2005, she did something smart. Something that would eventually change everything. She set up a living trust and put the house in it. She named herself trustee. The trust document had one guiding clause that I wouldn't read until much later. But when I did, I understood everything. The property shall serve the family, all members without exclusion. All members. Without exclusion. In 2012, Grandma Eleanor moved to a nursing home in Charlottesville. My mother and father moved into the house. No lease. No rent. Just a verbal understanding that they'd look after the place. Marcus and Elena took the upstairs 3 years after that. Also free. Also no lease. 18 years my parents had lived in that house without paying $1. And somewhere along the way they'd started talking about it like it was theirs. Our home. The family home. The house we've poured our lives into. As if the woman who actually bought it, the woman sitting in a nursing home 60 miles away, had simply vanished. But there was the basement. A finished space that used to be the family room where I'd watched movies with Grandma Eleanor as a kid. 3 years ago, Catherine had it renovated. New lock on the door. Separate entrance from the side yard. She told everyone the basement was damp and unsafe. She told Grandma Eleanor it had a mold problem. Nobody went down there. Nobody asked questions. That night, December 26th, after Marcus's wrong number text and Aunt Diane's phone call, I opened the Airbnb app on my phone and typed in my parents' address. Took 4 seconds. Cozy basement suite. Richmond, Virginia. 47 reviews. Superhost badge. $89 a night. Host name, Catherine M. I scrolled through the listing photos. And there it was. Grandma Eleanor's old basement. The one with the wood-paneled walls and the brick fireplace. New furniture. New linens. A little basket of toiletries on the nightstand. Everything gleaming and perfect. 47 5-star reviews in a house that didn't belong to my mother. In a basement she told a 90-year-old woman was too dangerous to enter. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger yet. Clarity. She'd been stealing. I screenshotted everything. The listing. The reviews. The pricing. The host profile. Timestamp. December 26, 11:30 p.m. Then I closed the app, set my phone on the kitchen counter, and sat in the quiet for a long time. Tomorrow morning I was going to call Grandma Eleanor, and everything would change. If you're watching this right now and your heart is racing, if you're thinking about the injustice of it all, if you're wondering what happens next, then you understand something crucial. Sometimes the people who claim to love you will betray you in ways you couldn't have imagined. Sometimes they'll steal from the elderly. Sometimes they'll hurt children. And sometimes, just sometimes, there's someone brave enough to fight back. That someone was Grandma Eleanor. And she was 90 years old. I called at 7:15 a.m. on December 27th. Early, but Grandma Eleanor had been a dawn riser her whole life. The nursing home staff told me once she was usually dressed and reading by 6:30. She picked up on the third ring. That voice. Coarse with age, thin but precise in a way that age hadn't touched. Like a blade that had been sharpened so many times, it was narrow but still cut clean. Miranda, you're calling early. What happened? I told her all of it. Sophie at the door. The no room excuse. The walk home. The dark apartment. The voicemail. Grandma Eleanor went silent. Not the silence of someone who didn't hear. The silence of someone counting. I waited. I counted 2. 10 seconds. 12. Then she spoke and her voice hadn't changed a fraction. That house has 12 chairs and a table that seats 14, Miranda. I bought every single one of them. I told her about the Airbnb listing. The basement. The 47 reviews. The $89 a night under Catherine's name. Another silence. 5 seconds this time. So she is making money off my house and turning away my great-grandchild at the door on Christmas. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Miranda, do you have that screenshot? The listing. Yes, ma'am. Good. I'm calling Martin this morning. Martin Caldwell, Grandma Eleanor's estate attorney in Charlottesville. He'd set up the trust in 2005 and handled every update since. I'd met him once years ago. Quiet, careful. The kind of man who wore the same gray suit every day and never forgot a clause. Before she hung up, Grandma Eleanor said one more thing. Something that made me understand she'd been waiting for this moment. I already knew something was wrong, Miranda. Last Christmas, Sophie called me to say Merry Christmas and she told me, Grandma Eleanor, I sat alone at the little table. I asked Catherine about it. Catherine said Sophie preferred it that way. A breath. A lifetime of breath. I believed her. I will not believe her again. That morning, while my mother was posting leftover Christmas photos on Facebook, the ones from the dinner table Sophie wasn't allowed to sit at, captioned Blessed Family Time. A woman 90 miles away in a Charlottesville nursing home was on the phone with her attorney. And the clock had started. Martin Caldwell called me at 2:15 that afternoon. His voice was what I expected. Measured. Unhurried. The kind of tone that doesn't waste words because each one has already been weighed. Miss Sinclair, your great-grandmother has briefed me on the situation. I've reviewed the trust documents. I want to walk you through where things stand. He spoke for maybe 4 minutes. This is what he said, and I'm paraphrasing only slightly because I wrote it down on the back of a grocery receipt while standing in my kitchen. The house was held in the Eleanor Caldwell Revocable Living Trust, Established 2005. Grandma Eleanor was the sole trustee. My mother and father had no lease, no deed, no ownership interest of any kind. They were what the law calls permissive occupants. People allowed to stay at the owner's pleasure. And that pleasure could be revoked with 30 days written notice. Virginia statute. Black and white. Your grandmother has instructed me to do 2 things, Martin said. First, prepare a 30-day notice to vacate, addressed to Catherine and Robert Sinclair. Second, draft an amendment to the trust removing them as beneficiaries and naming you as sole beneficiary, with Sophie as contingent beneficiary. I leaned against the counter. How soon? The notice will go out by certified mail tomorrow, December 28th. I'll bring the amendment to your grandmother's facility tomorrow morning for signature. I've already arranged a notary and 2 witnesses from the nursing home staff. I said yes. Then he added something that made me grip the edge of the counter. Miss Sinclair, there's the secondary matter. If Catherine has been generating rental income from trust property without the trustee's knowledge or consent, that may constitute conversion of trust property income. I'll need you to send me everything you have. The listing, the screenshots, the reviews, all of it. I sent the folder that night. Every screenshot, every timestamp, labeled and organized the way I label patient charts. Because when you've spent a decade in medicine, you learn that documentation isn't just a habit. It's a survival skill. Martin's reply came at 9:47 p.m. Received. This is comprehensive. We'll proceed in the morning. Somewhere in Richmond, my mother was probably watching television in a house she didn't own. Sleeping in rooms she hadn't paid for. Spending money she'd skimmed from a basement she'd lied about. And she had no idea that by this time tomorrow, her name would be crossed off a legal document and replaced with mine. Are you starting to see how the law works? How documentation becomes power? How a woman who felt powerless her entire life is about to become unstoppable. Subscribe right now because part 3 is where everything comes to a head. This is where a 90-year-old woman signs papers that will change her granddaughter's life. This is where Sophie's mother finally stops swallowing it. Tell me in the comments. Do you think Miranda made the right choice? Should she have tried to work it out with her family? Or was it time for them to face the consequences? I want to hear your thoughts. I discovered my mother was renting out my grandmother's basement for $89 a night without telling her. She'd made over $52,000 in 3 years. My grandmother called her attorney. The clock started ticking. This is part 3. December 28th. I drove to Charlottesville with Sophie in the back seat. 1 hour on I-64. Winter sun, flat and white through the windshield. Sophie didn't ask where we were going. I told her we were visiting Grandma Eleanor, and her face had lit up the way it used to before Christmas stopped being a word that made her happy. The nursing home smelled like it always did. Lemon disinfectant and cafeteria coffee, and something floral the staff sprayed in the hallways that never quite covered the rest. That smell that's supposed to be clean but just smells like time running out. Grandma Eleanor was in the common room sitting in her wheelchair with her back straight, wearing a blue cardigan buttoned to the top. Martin Caldwell stood beside her in his gray suit. A leather folder was open on the table. Next to him, a woman with a notary stamp and 2 nursing home staff members. I recognized Linda from reception and a CNA named Terrence who'd always been kind to Grandma Eleanor. Sophie saw her first. Grandma Eleanor. Grandma Eleanor's face changed. The sharpness softened just around the eyes. She held her arms open. Come here, little sunshine. Sophie hugged her. Careful the way kids learn to be careful with people who are small and old and precious. Grandma Eleanor held her for a long moment, one hand on the back of Sophie's head. Then she leaned back and looked at her. Did you have a good Christmas, honey? Sophie hesitated. Looked at me. Looked back at Grandma Eleanor. It's okay, Grandma Eleanor said. Her voice was so gentle it would have broken me if I hadn't already been breaking for days. The next one will be different. I promise you that. Then she turned to Martin and nodded once. Business. Martin read the amendment summary aloud. Steady, formal. Every word precise enough for a courtroom. Catherine Sinclair and Robert Sinclair removed as beneficiaries. Miranda Sinclair named sole beneficiary. Sophie Sinclair named contingent beneficiary. The house, the trust assets, The whole structure Eleanor had built over 40 years of careful saving. Redirected. Grandma Eleanor signed with a hand that shook slightly, but never hesitated. The notary stamped. Linda and Terrence signed as witnesses. Martin slid the 30-day notice across the table next. Grandma Eleanor signed that too. Then she asked for a piece of paper. Not the legal kind. Just a sheet of lined notebook paper from Linda's desk. She wrote in a hand that was looser than it used to be, but still legible. Still hers. Catherine, I gave you my home so my family would always have a place. You turned away a child on Christmas. That is not what my home is for. Eleanor. She folded it and slid it into the envelope with the notice. Send it, she said. Martin sealed the envelope. Addressed it. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. Before we left, Grandma Eleanor held my hand. Her grip was still surprisingly firm. I'm 89, Miranda, she said. I've buried a husband, a son, and 2 friends this year alone. But I am not too old to protect what's mine. And Sophie is mine. Do you see it? Do you see what's happening here? An elderly woman who could have looked away. Who could have believed the lie that this wasn't her problem anymore. Instead, she became her great-granddaughter's fiercest protector. This is what real love looks like. This is what courage looks like when you're 90 years old. By 4 p.m. that afternoon, a sealed envelope was sitting in a blue USPS collection box outside the Charlottesville post office. Addressed to Catherine and Robert Sinclair. Stamped certified. Heading south toward Richmond. The clock had started, and it was ticking louder every day. That night, after Sophie was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. The apartment quiet around me. The radiator ticked. The faucet dripped. And I built a case. I organized the receipts folder the way I organized patient charts at the hospital. Chronological. Labeled. Nothing missing. Nothing out of order. Every file had a date. A source. A 1-line description. The voicemail. 23 seconds. December 25th. 5:52 p.m. The photo Maggie took. Sophie on the bed in a dark apartment. Timestamp 6:02 p.m. The recording of Catherine's phone call. 7 minutes 23 seconds. December 26th. 8:14 a.m. Marcus's texts. All 5 of them, including the one he sent to the wrong person. Aunt Diane's call. Noted with time and summary. The Airbnb listing. 47 reviews. $89 per night. Host name Catherine M. Superhost. The listing photos. Grandma Eleanor's basement with new furniture, new linens, and a basket of complimentary toiletries in a room an 89-year-old woman had been told was too damp to enter. I pulled up the reviews and read through them one by one, looking for details. Most were routine. Clean space, great location, responsive host. But one posted 6 months earlier caught my eye. Wonderful stay. Catherine even showed us family photos in the living room. Such a warm, welcoming home. Family photos. In the living room. She'd invited strangers into Grandma Eleanor's house. Showed them our family pictures on the wall. Played the gracious hostess. All while making money she had no right to in a home she had no claim to. With photographs of a family she just shut the door on. I emailed Martin the full folder at 11:15 p.m. His reply came at 11:47. Received. I'll include the Airbnb documentation in the supplementary demand letter. The demand letter. That was the second envelope. The one Martin said he'd send after the first one landed. The notice would tell my parents to leave. The demand letter would tell them how much they owed. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen for a while, listening to the radiator and the faucet and the sound of Sophie breathing in the next room. 2 envelopes. One was already in the mail. The other was being drafted. And my parents didn't know about either. January 3rd. 9 days after Christmas. The day the leash came off. Richmond Family Court. 2nd floor. Courtroom 2B. Fluorescent lights. Beige walls. The American flag hanging limp beside the judge's bench. I sat at the petitioner's table in a navy blazer I'd bought at a consignment shop and pressed the night before. My attorney beside me. Daniel sat across the aisle with his lawyer. Arms crossed. Jaw tight. Looking at me like I was a problem he'd already solved in his head. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. My attorney presented the file. Stable employment. 12 years as an ER nurse at St. Mary's. Current lease on the apartment. Character references from 2 supervisors and Sophie's school counselor. A letter, the one Martin had prepared, confirming that I would be moving into a family-owned property in the near future as beneficiary of the Eleanor Caldwell Revocable Living Trust. Stable housing. Stable income. Stable life. Daniel's attorney tried to argue instability, the small apartment, the night shifts, the divorce itself, but he had nothing concrete. No evidence of harm. No evidence of neglect. And the one card my mother had threatened to play, calling me an unfit mother, never materialized. Catherine didn't show up. She didn't submit a statement. I don't know if she chose not to or if she was too busy dealing with the certified mail envelope that had arrived at her door that very morning. USPS tracking confirmed. Delivered January 3rd. 1:23 p.m. Signed by C. Sinclair. The judge ruled at 10:40 a.m. Full physical custody to me. Daniel would have scheduled visitation every other weekend and alternating holidays. The judge signed the order. The clerk stamped it. My attorney handed me a copy. I walked out of that courthouse holding 2 pieces of paper. One said my daughter was mine. The other, the trust amendment, said my silence was over. That same morning back in Richmond, a mail carrier had walked up my parents' porch steps and left an envelope that required a signature. My mother had signed for it at 1:23 p.m., probably expecting a late Christmas card. A bill. One of those charity solicitations she always threw away without reading. She wasn't throwing this one away. Catherine called me at 1:47 p.m., 24 minutes after she opened the envelope. I know because I was sitting in my car in the courthouse parking lot, still holding the custody order when my phone rang and her name appeared on the screen. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. Her voice was different now. Not the smooth managing Catherine from 2 days ago. This was high. Unraveled. Shaking at the seams like a wall with the studs pulled out. What is this? What did you do? This says we have to leave in 30 days. This is our house, Audrey. I watched a woman cross the parking lot with a stroller bundled against the cold. I let Catherine's words settle into the air between us. Then I said evenly, it's Grandma Eleanor's house. It's always been Grandma Eleanor's house. Your grandmother is senile. She doesn't know what she's signing. I will contest this. I will take this to court. She was evaluated by her physician last week, Mom. She's competent. The amendment and the notice are both valid. It's been reviewed. I heard Robert in the background, muffled, agitated, then his voice closer like he'd taken the phone. Audrey, this is ridiculous. We've lived here for 18 years. You can't just. I didn't. Grandma Eleanor did. You have 30 days. He went quiet. Catherine grabbed the phone back. Where are we supposed to go? I let the silence hold for 3 seconds. The kind of silence that says everything. I don't know, Mom. Maybe somewhere with enough room. She heard it. I know she heard it because the line went dead. She didn't hang up gently. She hung up the way people do when the ground shifts under them, and they don't know yet whether it's an earthquake or just the beginning of one. The USPS certified mail receipt was already on file with Martin's office. Delivered. Signed. Time-stamped. The 30-day clock had started, and there was no unsigned version of that letter. No take-back. No let's talk about this over dinner. Just a legal document in a sealed envelope with a handwritten note from an 89-year-old woman who remembered exactly how many chairs were around that table. My mother's first instinct wasn't to apologize. It wasn't to call Grandma Eleanor. It wasn't even to call a lawyer. Not yet. Her first instinct was to perform. January 4th. One day after the notice arrived, Catherine posted on Facebook. Public. Not friends only. Public. She wanted reach. Please pray for our family. Our eldest daughter has been manipulating her elderly grandmother, a 90-year-old woman in a nursing home, to take away our home. We have poured our hearts and our lives into this house for nearly 2 decades. We are devastated. Please keep us in your thoughts and prayers. 67 reactions. 34 comments. Hearts. Crying faces. Praying hands. Oh, Catherine, how awful. Stay strong, honey. Some children don't know what they have until it's gone. One woman from Catherine's church group. This is just heartbreaking. Your family is in our prayers. 3 people called me heartless without knowing my name. Not one of them knew a child had walked home alone in the dark because of the woman they were praying for. Marcus jumped in. His comment pinned under the post. My sister is trying to steal our inheritance. Don't be fooled. Then Catherine called the pastor. Pastor Williams, a kind man genuinely, but a man who only ever heard one side of anything that happened in my mother's orbit. He called me that evening. Voice careful. Measured. Audrey, your mother is really struggling. Maybe we could all sit down. And Pastor Williams, did my mother tell you she turned my 10-year-old daughter away from Christmas dinner? Pause. She said it was a misunderstanding. I have the voicemail my daughter left me from an empty apartment that night. It's 23 seconds long. Would you like to hear it? He didn't answer that question. I'll pray for the situation, he said. I thanked him and hung up. I screenshotted the Facebook post. The comments. Marcus's reply. The timestamps. All of it went into the receipts folder. I did not post a response. I did not comment. I did not correct a single person publicly. There would be a time for the truth to be heard. But it wouldn't be on Facebook. And it wouldn't be on my mother's terms. The first week of January felt like standing in an open field while something circled overhead. 4 relatives called me in 5 days. Every one of them had talked to Catherine first. Every one of them used the same script like they'd been handed a pamphlet at the door. Just apologize, Audrey. Think about your parents' age. You're tearing this family apart. Aunt Diane called again. Sweetie, can't you just come to dinner and sort this out? Your mom is beside herself. I said, Diane, did she tell you about the Airbnb listing? The one where she rented out Grandma Eleanor's basement for 3 years without telling her. Diane went quiet. I don't know anything about that. Then she said she had to go. Nobody asked about Sophie. Not once. Not a single relative in 5 days of phone calls asked how a 10-year-old was doing after being told she didn't belong at her own family's Christmas table. But someone did. Someone who mattered. Tuesday night, Maggie came by after our shifts overlapped. She brought pizza and a bottle of cheap wine and sat on my kitchen counter like she'd done since we were 22. Sophie was already in bed. You're not crazy, Maggie said, chewing crust. You're not the villain. That voicemail exists. Those screenshots exist. Reality is not up for a vote. I felt something loosen in my chest. Just a little. Just enough to breathe. Grandma Eleanor called every evening that week. Short calls. 2-3 minutes. Her voice steady like a handrail on a staircase you're afraid to climb. Martin is handling it, she'd say. You just hold on. One night, she told me something I hadn't heard before. In 1978, my mother-in-law told me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving dinner. She said I didn't cook well enough to sit at her table. I was 28 with a baby. Her voice got quieter. I remember the walk to the car. I remember the cold. She paused for a long time. I swore no woman in my family would feel that again. I'm keeping that promise. That same night I was tucking Sophie in when she said it. Quiet. Not dramatic. Not tearful. Just the words laid on the pillow like a question she'd been carrying too long. Mom. Does Grandma not like me because I'm a problem? I held her. I held my daughter in that small bedroom with the radiator ticking and the city humming outside, and I said, You are not a problem. You have never ever been a problem. She nodded into my shoulder. She didn't ask again. But I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, and I made a decision that was already made. This would never happen to her again. Not from them. Not from anyone. We're getting close. The custody hearing is won. The amendments are signed. The notices are sent. But the battle isn't over. My mother is about to hire a lawyer. Marcus is about to call with desperation in his voice. And a judge is about to deliver a verdict that will change everything. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is your moment. Because part 4 is where the law becomes a weapon. Where my family finally understands that they're not dealing with someone who will swallow it anymore. Tell me. Have you ever stood up to your family? What was the hardest part? Tell me in the comments. Because your story matters. Your courage matters. And sometimes we need to hear stories like this to find the strength to fight our own battles. I won custody of Sophie. My grandmother signed the amendment. The notice to vacate was delivered. My mother posted on Facebook claiming I was manipulating a 90-year-old woman. But she had no idea what was coming next. This is part 4. Janet hired a lawyer in the second week of January. Not an estate attorney. Not a trust specialist. A general practitioner from a strip mall office on Midlothian Turnpike, whose website had a stock photo of a gavel and the tagline, "Fighting for Your Rights." His name was Gary Luskin. His first move was to send Martin a letter on letterhead so thin you could read through it. My clients Janet and Robert Sinclair have established continuous residency at the above address for 18 years. They have maintained the property, paid utilities, and made improvements consistent with an implied tenancy. The 30-day notice issued by your client is defective and unenforceable. Martin called me the next morning. If I hadn't known him, I might have mistaken his tone for boredom. But it wasn't boredom. It was the calm of a man who'd been doing this for 3 decades and had seen this letter 100 times before. Implied tenancy requires evidence of rent payment or a written lease, Martin said. His voice so measured it could have been a recording. Your parents have neither. They are permissive occupants. The notice stands. Martin's reply to Luskin was 4 pages. Attached. A certified copy of the trust deed showing Eleanor Caldwell as sole owner and trustee. A physician's letter from Dr. Rivera at the nursing home confirming Grandma Eleanor's cognitive competency. The signed, notarized trust amendment. And like a grenade tucked politely into the last exhibit, a summary of the Airbnb listing, the superhost badge, the 47 reviews, and an estimated income calculation. The final paragraph of Martin's letter read, "Should your clients wish to dispute this notice in court, we are prepared to file an unlawful detainer action. We also intend to pursue a separate claim for conversion of trust property income in the estimated amount of $52,340. We welcome the opportunity to present the Airbnb revenue documentation before a judge." Martin told me what happened next. Luskin called him. Not in writing this time. On the phone. The bluster was gone. "Mr. Haywood, I need to be honest with my clients. If you can prove that Airbnb income, Mr. Luskin, it's on the internet. It has 47 reviews." The line went quiet for a long time after that. Then Luskin said he'd advise his clients to consider their options. 2 days later, I learned from Marcus that Catherine's lawyer had strongly recommended she not contest the notice. She fired him anyway. Not because he was wrong. Because he'd said a thing she didn't want to hear out loud. Marcus called me on a Wednesday in mid-January. I almost didn't answer. Not out of spite, but because his name on my screen had come to feel like a weather alert for a storm I was already standing in. But I picked up. The voice on the other end was different. The swagger was gone. What was left sounded like someone who'd just done the math and didn't like the total. "Audrey, listen. I didn't know about the Airbnb thing. That was all Mom. I just live here. You can't put me out on the street. I have 2 kids." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Marcus, you've lived in a house you don't own rent-free for 5 years. You told me I was trapped. You threatened to call my ex's lawyer. And you sat at that table on Christmas while your 10-year-old niece was told there was no room for her. Don't call me about your kids." Silence. Then the old Marcus flickered back. That defensive, angry version that I'd been trying to reach through for years. "This is insane. You're using an old woman to get back at us. Grandma Eleanor doesn't even know what she's signing." She knew exactly what she was signing. She set 12 chairs and a table for 14. She counted. She remembers. He hung up. 20 minutes later, I saw the message on the family group chat. Marcus in all caps. "Audrey is destroying this family. She has turned great-grandma against us. This is elder abuse." Elder abuse. Because a 90-year-old woman had decided to protect a 10-year-old one. I screenshotted it. Sent it to Martin. His reply was 2 sentences. Noted. Mrs. Eleanor's physician affidavit and the notary witnesses will address any competency challenge. Let them file if they'd like. What Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Grandma Eleanor had already anticipated this back on December 28 when Martin brought the amendment to the nursing home. He'd also brought a signed affidavit from Dr. Rivera. It stated in medical language that left no room for reinterpretation that Eleanor Isabella Caldwell was alert, oriented to person, place, time, and situation, and fully competent to manage her legal and financial affairs. Dated. Signed. Notarized. Filed with the trust documents. My mother called it manipulation. My brother called it elder abuse. But the paper trail told a different story. And paper doesn't flinch when you raise your voice at it. At the end of January, 3 weeks into the 30-day notice, Catherine drove to Charlottesville. I wasn't there. I didn't learn the details until Grandma Eleanor told me that evening, and Martin confirmed the rest through the nursing home's incident report, which he'd requested a copy of. So I'm telling you what happened the way it was told to me by two people who had no reason to embellish. Catherine walked into the nursing home lobby at 11:40 a.m. She was wearing what she always wore to make an impression. The beige wool coat, the pearl studs, the look of a woman who volunteered at church and expected every door to open accordingly. She approached the front desk. I'm here to see Eleanor Caldwell. I'm her granddaughter-in-law. Linda, the same Linda who had witnessed the trust amendment signing, looked at her screen then back at Catherine. I'm sorry, ma'am. Miss Eleanor has updated her visitor authorization list. Your name is not on it. Catherine's smile didn't break. Not right away. There must be a mistake. I've known her for 30 years. I'm family. I understand, ma'am, but we follow the residents' expressed wishes. I'm not able to authorize this visit. The smile cracked. Catherine asked for a supervisor. The supervisor said the same thing. Politely. Firmly. The way healthcare workers learn to do when someone powerful is not used to being told no. Catherine began to cry. Or at least to produce the sounds and posture of crying. She stayed in the lobby for 12 minutes. When it became clear that tears were not going to unlock the door, the supervisor said, Ma'am, if you're unable to leave on your own, we'll need to contact security. Catherine left. From the parking lot, she called Robert. I know this because Grandma Eleanor heard from Linda what Catherine said on her way out, loud enough that 3 other visitors turned around. That girl has poisoned her against us. Then Catherine tried something else. She called Grandma Eleanor directly. Grandma Eleanor answered. She told me she let Catherine talk for about 15 seconds. The usual opening. Grandma Eleanor, please. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. We love you. We would never. Then Grandma Eleanor spoke. There was no misunderstanding, Catherine. You turned away a child, my great-grandchild, on Christmas in my house. And then you rented out my basement for money you never told me about. Catherine started to stammer. That's not. I was going to. This conversation is over. Talk to Martin. And she hung up. Do you feel it? The shift in power? The moment when someone who has been controlled her entire life finally says, no more? That's what this is. That's what happens when you stop swallowing it. When you stop trying to keep the peace at the cost of your own dignity. And it was just beginning. The nursing home visitor log stamped and dated with Linda's initials recorded Catherine's visit and denial. The staff incident report noted in clinical language. Visitor became verbally agitated in lobby. Declined to leave when asked. Departed after security was mentioned. No physical incident. One more piece of paper. One more timestamp. One more entry in a file that was getting thicker by the day. The second envelope arrived on February 3rd. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. Same process. Same mailman. Same porch steps. But this time it wasn't a notice to vacate. It was a demand letter. And the number at the bottom had a comma in it. Martin had spent 2 weeks building the financial case. He'd submitted a third-party subpoena request to Airbnb through their legal compliance portal. Standard procedure for trust attorneys investigating unauthorized use of trust assets. What came back was devastating. A full earnings statement for the host account registered to Catherine. A link to the property address. 3 years of booking records. Payout amounts. Calendar availability. Occupancy rates. Total gross income deposited into Catherine's personal bank account from Airbnb rentals of Grandma Eleanor's basement? $52,340. The demand letter was on Martin's letterhead. 3 pages. Clean. Clinical. The kind of document that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't need to. It cited the trust clause granting exclusive authority over trust property to the trustee. It cited Virginia law on conversion of trust property income. And it requested, in language so polite it almost sounded like a suggestion, full restitution of $52,340 within 60 days, or the trust would file a civil lawsuit. Attached: the Airbnb earnings statement, the listing screenshots, the 47 reviews, the archived listing from the Wayback Machine, because Catherine had quietly deleted the Airbnb page 2 days earlier, thinking that if she erased the listing, she erased the evidence. She was wrong. The internet has a memory that outlasts good intentions and bad ones alike. Catherine didn't call me this time. She didn't call anyone as far as I know, but Robert did. He called me that evening. And for the first time in my entire life, my father sounded like a man who understood that the floor he was standing on had never belonged to him. "Audrey." His voice was thin, almost translucent. "We don't have $52,000. Your mother, she spent it. The truck for Marcus. Credit cards. A cruise last year. It's gone. That's between you and Grandma Eleanor's lawyer, Dad." Silence. Then very quietly, "What happens if we can't pay?" Then Martin files. I heard him exhale. Not anger. Something more like the sound a structure makes when the last supporting wall gives way. "Okay," he said. And hung up. $52,000. That's how much it cost my parents to turn away a 10-year-old on Christmas. Except they didn't pay it. They spent it on a truck. On a cruise. On a life that was never theirs to fund. And now the receipt had arrived. What happened next I pieced together from 3 sources. A voicemail Robert left me at 2 a.m. that he probably didn't remember leaving. A text exchange between Marcus and Elena that Elena forwarded to me weeks later. And one very awkward phone call from Elena herself. The Sinclair family. The one Catherine had spent 30 years curating for the outside world. The Facebook posts. The church potlucks. The matching sweater Christmas photos. Began to eat itself from the inside. It started with Marcus. He'd finally done what he should have done years ago. He looked at the numbers. The truck his mother had given him? $28,000. The gift she'd made toward his apartment deposit? $8,000. He'd always assumed these came from his parents' retirement savings or Robert's pension. They didn't. They came from a basement that wasn't Catherine's. In a house that wasn't Catherine's. Rented to strangers on a platform tied to Catherine's bank account. Marcus called Catherine. I wasn't on the line, but Elena told me later how it went. "Mom, you told me Dad's pension paid for all of this. Don't you dare question me, Marcus. You used stolen money to buy me a truck?" The word stolen landed hard enough that Catherine didn't speak for 5 seconds. Then she did what she always did. She pivoted to Robert. "If your father had been any kind of man, I wouldn't have had to." Robert apparently had had enough. "You rented the basement, Catherine. You spent the money. Don't put this on me." It was the first time, according to Marcus, that Robert had ever contradicted Catherine in front of anyone. But it was also 20 years too late. And they both knew it. Elena called me the following day. Polite. Nervous. Her voice pitched a half step too high. "Audrey, I know we haven't been close, but Marcus and I didn't know about the Airbnb money. Is there any way you could talk to the lawyer? Maybe work something out?" "Elena, I'm sorry you're in this position, but the trust belongs to Grandma Eleanor. You'll need to talk to her attorney." She thanked me and hung up. I think she was hoping for mercy. I think she deserved some, honestly. But mercy wasn't mine to give. It was Grandma Eleanor's. And Grandma Eleanor had already given it for 18 years. She was done. That week, Catherine made one more Facebook post. Shorter this time. Just 3 words. "When your own family betrays you." 12 reactions. 3 comments. And then a 4th. From someone I didn't recognize. Someone who had apparently been a guest in that basement. "Catherine, I've been to your place. Is that the same basement listed on Airbnb? I thought your grandmother owned that house." 2 hours later, the post was deleted. But I'd already taken the screenshot. The family that had presented a united front at every Thanksgiving. Every Christmas. Every church potluck. The one that smiled in matching sweaters while a little girl sat alone at a folding table was dissolving. Not because I tore it apart. Because the truth did. That voicemail Robert left me at 2 a.m., the one he probably didn't remember leaving, said this. Audrey, it's Dad. I don't know how to say this. I don't know how to explain how we got here. Your mother, she's been so angry. And I let her. I always just let her. I should have said something. Years ago. I should have stopped her. About the basement. About Sophie at that table. About everything. But I didn't. And now we have 30 days and nowhere to go and $52,000 we don't have. I'm calling a realtor tomorrow. We're going to have to rent somewhere. Get an apartment. I'm sorry, Audrey. I'm so sorry. I failed you as a father. I failed Sophie as a grandfather. I failed Eleanor as a son-in-law. I failed everyone. The line went static for a moment. I'm sorry. Then silence. I listened to that voicemail 3 times. And I didn't cry. I should have cried. But I was too tired. Too drained. Too much of me had already been used up keeping the peace. We're at the turning point. The documents are filed. The demand has been made. The family is fracturing. And now comes the part that will finally put an end to this. The courthouse. The judgment. The moment when a judge reads the evidence and delivers a verdict that changes everything. If you're wondering what happened next, if you want to see my parents finally face the consequences of their choices, if you want to know whether a 10-year-old girl finally got her grandmother back, subscribe right now, because part 5 is the finale, and it's going to blow your mind. Tell me in the comments. Do you think Robert was complicit? Or was he just a man who never learned how to stand up? Because I'm genuinely interested in what you think. This is real life. And real life is complicated. My parents were ordered to leave. The demand letter arrived. They owed $52,340. My father finally apologized. But the final verdict hadn't come yet. The judge hadn't spoken. This is part 5. The finale. The 30-day deadline fell on February 2nd. I know because I'd counted every single one of those days the way a nurse counts vitals, precisely with a quiet awareness that the wrong number could change everything. Martin emailed me the evening before. Deadline is tomorrow. If they don't vacate, I'll file the unlawful detainer action with the General District Court on Monday morning. I drove by the house that afternoon. I didn't stop. I didn't pull into the driveway. I just slowed down as I passed. The way you slow past an accident on the highway. Not because you want to look, but because something in you needs to know. Both cars were in the driveway. Lights on in the kitchen. The wreath from Christmas was still on the door, dried out, browning at the edges. Nobody had taken it down. They weren't leaving. That evening, Catherine texted me. Not a phone call this time. Just 6 words on a screen. We're not leaving. This is home. I forwarded it to Martin. His reply. Filing Monday. Marcus at least had read the room. He and Elena had found an apartment in Short Pump. Small. 1 bath. The deposit paid by Elena's parents. Marcus had texted me the day before. His last message in what had become a very short thread. I moved out. I'm done with this. But you should know. Mom is telling people you're going to have her arrested. I didn't respond. That same week, I'd noticed that the Airbnb listing had vanished from the platform. Catherine had deleted it. Scrubbed the page. Removed the photos. Taken down the reviews. She probably thought that if the listing didn't exist, the evidence didn't either. But Martin's paralegal had already captured the full listing through the Wayback Machine. Archived pages. Cached reviews. Host profile. Everything. And the Airbnb earnings statement obtained through the legal subpoena existed independently of the website. You can delete a listing. You can't delete a bank deposit. Monday morning, Martin Caldwell walked into the General District Court in Richmond carrying a filing folder 3 inches thick. And inside that folder was 30 days worth of silence, 47 reviews worth of evidence, and one 90-year-old woman's refusal to let her family be redefined by the people who'd stolen from it. The filing went in on a Monday. Martin submitted the unlawful detainer action with every exhibit attached. The trust deed, the 30-day notice with its certified mail receipt, and USPS tracking confirmation, the physician's capacity letter, the trust amendment, and as a supplementary exhibit, the full Airbnb documentation. The clerk stamped it, assigned a case number, Scheduled the hearing for 10 days out. Virginia moves fast on unlawful detainer. The law doesn't like ambiguity about who owns a house and who doesn't. Wednesday afternoon. A process server walked up the porch steps of Grandma Eleanor's house and knocked on the front door. Robert opened it. The server handed him 2 copies of the summons. One for him, one for Catherine, and had him sign the acknowledgement of service. Robert looked at the papers, then at the server, then back at the papers. His face, the server noted in the affidavit of service filed the next day, went gray. Catherine wasn't home. She was at the grocery store, which meant Robert had to deliver the news himself. I don't know exactly what that conversation looked like. And I don't need to. I know the result. Catherine called Pastor Williams, called Aunt Diane, called 2 cousins. She worked the phones like she always did, pulling the levers of sympathy she'd installed over 30 years of casseroles and prayer chains. But this time the machine didn't respond the way it used to. Pastor Williams told her gently that he'd spoken with me, that he'd heard the voicemail. He suggested reflection. Aunt Diane didn't pick up. One cousin asked, "Catherine, is it true about the Airbnb thing?" Catherine hung up on her. And then there was Mrs. Dorothy Palmer. Dorothy Palmer, 71, lived 3 doors down from Grandma Eleanor's house. She'd been there almost as long as the house itself. She'd watched Catherine and Robert come and go for 18 years. And she'd seen something on Christmas night that she hadn't understood until now. She called me that Thursday evening. Her voice was soft. Virginia, cautious. The way people are when they're about to say something that's been sitting in their chest for 5 weeks. "Audrey, honey, I need to tell you something. Christmas night I was on my porch bringing in the recycling. And I saw your little girl walking down the sidewalk alone, carrying a bag in the cold. I almost called the police. I should have. I didn't know what was happening. I thought maybe she was going to a friend's house, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel right, and I didn't do anything, and I am so sorry." I felt tears finally come. Real ones. "Thank you for telling me. I meant it." And I told her that if she was willing, Martin might ask her to provide a written statement. "Yes," she said. "Yes." Before you even finished the sentence. A stranger saw my daughter in the cold, and she cared enough to reach out, while her own family was warm inside eating Christmas dinner. That said everything about who deserved to be in that house. The hearing was on a Thursday. General District Court. Richmond. Small courtroom. Fluorescent lights. A judge named Honorable Karen Yee, who looked like she'd heard 10,000 cases and remembered the details of everyone. Martin sat at the petitioner's table. I sat behind him. On the other side, Catherine and Robert. Alone. No attorney. Luskin had declined to continue representing them after reviewing the Airbnb evidence. Or more precisely, after learning that Martin intended to introduce it in open court. Catherine hadn't found a replacement. She sat in her beige wool coat, pearl studs, hands folded in her lap like she was at Sunday service. Robert stared at the table. Martin presented the case in under 20 minutes. The trust deed, the notice, the certified mail receipt with USPS tracking and Catherine's signature, the physician's capacity letter, the trust amendment, and then, as a supplementary exhibit, the Airbnb documentation, the earnings statement, the listing screenshots, the reviews, the archived Wayback Machine capture. Judge Yee reviewed the file. Then she looked at Catherine. "Ma'am, do you wish to respond?" Catherine stood. She smoothed her coat. "Your Honor, we have maintained that house for 18 years. We are family. This is a family disagreement, and I believe it can be resolved privately." Judge Yee looked at the file again, then back at Catherine. "Ma'am, did you receive rental income from the trust property?" Catherine's hands tightened on the edge of the table. That was just a small. Did you or did you not receive rental income from property held in a trust for which you are not the trustee?" The courtroom was very quiet. I could hear the ventilation system humming. "Yes." Judge Yee ruled in 11 minutes. Writ of possession. Catherine and Robert Sinclair were ordered to vacate the premises within 10 days. Regarding the Airbnb income, the judge noted that the trust had standing to pursue a civil claim for conversion and recommended the parties either mediate or proceed to circuit court. Catherine cried. Not the performative kind she'd deployed in the nursing home lobby. Real tears. The kind that come when you realize the script you've been reading from your entire life doesn't have any more pages. Robert sat beside her, hands on his knees looking at the floor. Martin gathered his documents. I stood and walked out through the double doors into the hallway where the light was gray and flat and unremarkable. No dramatic music. No slow-motion moment. Just a woman holding a court order in a manila folder walking toward the elevator. The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The documents spoke for themselves. They always do when you take the time to keep them. They moved out on a Saturday in mid-February. I know because Maggie drove past the house that afternoon. I'd asked her to. Not because I needed to witness it, but because some part of me needed to know it was real. A rented box truck in the driveway. Robert carrying lamps and boxes. Catherine directing him from the porch in her coat, arms crossed, mouth in a line. Neighbors watched from porches and driveways. The way people do when something private becomes public. Not with glee. Just with that quiet, careful attention that comes from knowing a street story just changed. Maggie told me one detail that stayed with me. Catherine took everything. The furniture. The kitchenware. Kyle's old trophies from the upstairs shelf. The Christmas dishes she'd used for the dinner Sophie wasn't allowed to attend. She took the curtains. She took the bathroom mirror she'd hung over the sink. But she left the photograph. The framed one. Grandma Eleanor standing in front of the house in 1987. The writing on the back that said, "For my family, all of them." It was still on the wall when they locked the door behind them. Maggie sent me a text at 3:14 p.m. "They're gone." I went to the house the next morning. Sophie was with me. The place was cold. They'd turned the thermostat down before they left. One final small act of pettiness in a long catalog of them. The rooms were empty. Dusty in the corners. Sunlight falling through bare windows onto hardwood floors Grandma Eleanor had picked out almost 40 years ago. I found the photograph in the living room. Still hanging. Slightly crooked. I took it down, wiped the glass with my sleeve and hung it back. Level. Center. Where it belonged. Catherine and Robert rented a one-bedroom apartment in Midlothian. $1,400 a month. First rent payment in 18 years. The unlawful detainer judgment was now part of their court record. Any future landlord who ran a background check would see it. Martin had informed them that the $52,340 claim remained active. If they didn't agree to a repayment plan within 60 days, the trust would file in circuit court. She took the Christmas dishes. She left the photograph. I suppose she knew which one she'd earned, and which one she hadn't. We moved in at the end of February. Sophie carried her backpack up the porch steps. The same steps she'd stood on Christmas night holding a tote bag full of gifts. She stopped at the front door. She looked at me. I looked at her. "This is ours," she asked. "This is Grandma Eleanor's," I said. "She's letting us take care of it." Sophie nodded like that made perfect sense to her. The way things do when you're 10 and trust hasn't been ruined for you yet. At least not permanently. She picked the upstairs bedroom. The one with the window that looked out over the backyard where Grandma Eleanor had kept a vegetable garden in the 70s. The room was bare. Just walls and light. But Sophie walked in and spun around once with her arms out like she was testing the space. I stood in the doorway and watched her. And I didn't try to name what I was feeling because I knew if I did, I'd lose it. The joy. The victory. The weight finally lifting. Martin finalized the paperwork. The trust remained in Grandma Eleanor's name. She was still trustee, but I was now the named beneficiary and custodian of the property. I would pay the property taxes, maintain the house, carry the insurance. It was responsibility, not a gift. I understood the difference, and I was grateful for it. I called Grandma Eleanor that evening on FaceTime. The nursing home staff helped her prop the phone on her tray table. She watched Sophie taping a hand-drawn sign to her bedroom door. "Sophia's room," it said, with a little son in the corner. "The little son is home," Grandma Eleanor said. That week, I enrolled Sophie in an art class at the community center on Saturdays. She'd stopped drawing after Christmas. Not dramatically. Not as a statement. Just the way light dims when you close a curtain. She stopped carrying her sketchbook. She stopped putting suns on things. The first Saturday, She came home with a sheet of butcher paper rolled under her arm. She unrolled it on the kitchen table. And I saw what she'd made. A house with a big table in the center. 14 chairs drawn carefully around it. Each chair had a name tag. Grandma Eleanor, Mom, Auntie Maggie, Mrs. Palmer. And in the middle, the chair with the best view of the window. Sophie. She didn't draw herself at a little table anymore. She drew herself at the big one. And every chair had a sun on it. I also did something for myself that month. Something I probably should have done years earlier. I found a therapist. Not because I was broken, but because 30 years of a family like mine leaves patterns you don't even see until someone shows them to you. The first session, I sat in a chair that was nicer than any furniture in my old apartment. I told a woman with kind eyes and a box of tissues that I'd spent my whole life trying to be small enough to keep the peace. And how did that work out? She asked. I almost laughed. It didn't. No, she said. It never does. We're almost there. Almost to the end. But there's one more moment. One final piece to this story. Because healing isn't just about winning. It's about what you do after you've won. It's about who you become when you finally stop swallowing it. In March, a letter arrived. Not certified. Not from a lawyer. Just a regular envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front. The loops careful and deliberate. The way they always were when she wanted to look composed. I opened it at the kitchen table while Sophie was at school. Audrey, I'm your mother. This has gone far enough. Can we talk? 8 words. No apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd done to Sophie. Or what she'd done to Grandma Eleanor. Or what she'd done with $52,000 that wasn't hers. Just can we talk? As if the problem was a conversation that hadn't happened rather than a decade of choices that had. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and put it in the receipts folder. Same folder. Same system. Same shelf. It lived next to the voicemail transcript, the Airbnb screenshots, the court filing, every other document that told the real story of what family had meant in the Sinclair house. I didn't respond. I didn't block her number either. If she wanted to reach me, she could go through Martin. That was the boundary. And the boundary was not a punishment. It was a door that worked the way doors are supposed to. You could knock. But you couldn't just walk in and rearrange the furniture. Grandma Eleanor called me the same week. She sounded tired but clear. The way she always did. Like someone who had made peace with most things and was working on the rest. I'm not angry at Catherine, Audrey. I'm disappointed. But I won't let disappointment stand above Sophie's safety. Not ever. Those words. I carried them with me. Spring came slowly that year. Sophie rode her bike on the sidewalk out front. Mrs. Palmer waved from her porch every afternoon. Sometimes brought over banana bread. Maggie came by on Fridays with takeout. The radiator in the old apartment didn't tick anymore because we didn't live there anymore. And I only thought about it sometimes. Late at night, sitting on Grandma Eleanor's porch. The same porch where my daughter had stood in the cold 5 months earlier holding a bag of gifts for people who told her she wasn't worth a chair. I think about what Sophie said that night in the apartment when she asked if she was a problem. And I think about the drawing she made in art class. 14 chairs. Each one labeled. Each one with a sun. Family isn't a table you're seated at. It's how people treat you when they think no one is watching. And someone was always watching. A 10-year-old girl with a bag of gifts and a memory that doesn't forget. She's 11 now. She still draws suns on everything. And the front door of this house stays open. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because here's what I learned. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop swallowing it. Stop keeping the peace at the cost of your own dignity and your child's safety. Stop believing that love means accepting abuse dressed up as family obligation. Sometimes love means walking away. Sometimes love means calling a lawyer. Sometimes love means a 90-year-old woman in a nursing home saying no more. And sometimes love means being willing to fight. If you're in a situation right now where you're trying to keep the peace by swallowing things you shouldn't have to swallow, I want you to know something. You don't have to do this anymore. You can stand up. You can speak out. You can protect your children. You can protect yourself. It won't be easy. It will be the hardest thing you've ever done. But on the other side of that hard, there's a porch you can sit on. There's a house that's yours. There's a daughter who knows she was worth fighting for. There's peace. Real peace. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from knowing you did everything you could to protect the people you love. That's what this story is about. That's what I'm still living. And if you subscribe right now, you can be part of this community of people who get it, who understand that standing your ground doesn't make you heartless. It makes you strong. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for caring about a little girl who walked home in the cold on Christmas. Her name is Sophie. She's real. And she's home. If you've made it this far, you understand something most people don't. Family isn't just a word. It's a series of choices. And some of those choices break you. Some of those choices heal you. And some of those choices, the ones where you finally say no more, change everything. That's the story of my life. That's the story of my daughter. And now it's your turn. What will you choose?